Today, I'm going to air an interview I did on Joel Farrell's Strive for 25 podcast. Joel is a lender and a good friend of mine who interviewed me, and I love the topic of his show. Strive for 25 is all about how you can increase your income and work towards a 25% savings rate, which you can then use to seed your investments. And he interviewed me about the things that I did in my career, different chapters of my career. So starting in entertainment and moving into consulting, and then of course starting my own rental business and coaching business. So we talked about all the different income streams and the skills that I feel have allowed me to have any level of success so far in those areas. So this is a really fun, unique interview, and I'm excited to share it with you. Here we go.
Welcome back to another episode, the Strive for 25 podcast. Again, our mini series, 100 stories of increasing income. And I've got an amazing guest on today, Aaron Amin. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the business consulting world and some of the skills and experiences that he's leveraged to be able to increase his income. And I'll let you describe the actual numbers and percentages and whatnot. But Aaron, first off, thanks for making time. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks so much for having me. I love this topic and I'm excited to jump in.
I want to just take this quick second to outline kind of a high level of what you got going on. You're a real estate investor. You're working in the business consulting world. You also have a real estate academy that you're helping other aspiring investors to learn, taking that knowledge you've gained over the number of years and helping people with these roadmaps. So a little bit of background. So where people find you online, first off?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm all over the place online. I post quite a bit. X is my most active channel. I post there several times a day, sharing content about my journey, largely, like you said, operating at the intersection of all those things. I'm a management consultant by day. I run a real estate academy, and then I'm also a real estate investor. So I'm on X at Aaron Amin, just my full name. You can find more info about me also at aaronamin.com. I write about all of those different areas. But it would help to just give a quick high level of what I've got going on.
Let's do it.
Sure. So yeah, I'm based in Houston, Texas. My wife and 3 kids under the age of 3. I have 8-month-old identical twin boys and a 2.5-year-old daughter that keep me quite busy. I know Joel also has twins, so he knows the game. Yeah, I work full-time remotely, but as a management consultant for a mid-sized consulting company. And I am currently billing out at a large tech company as a project manager. Previously, I worked for 10 years in the entertainment industry. So I'll talk about how some of my experience in live entertainment and all the various personality and soft skills and political intelligence equipped me to grow in the consulting industry. But when COVID hit, live entertainment took a immediate nosedive, all events canceled overnight. And it was very unclear what the future of my career was going to be. That's when I decided to pivot over into the consulting industry. So I actually took a lateral step. Switching industries was very scary. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, if my skills were transferable, if my knowledge was transferable, and how I was going to make it work. But I'm happy to say that in the 4 years, this last weekend, I celebrated 4 years at this consulting company. I've been promoted 5 times and more than doubled my income. And there's a lot of different things I would attribute to being able to navigate through this new career path the way I did. And I'm happy to unpack any of those.
Right. So when you were going through COVID, that job in the, I guess you call it the concerts world or venue world, what were you doing at that point? What's a quick summary of what you were doing?
Yeah, so the entertainment industry is concerts in particular, notoriously difficult to get into and even harder to advance through the career ladder. There's a stat out there that I'm sure is probably even worse now, where every entry level unpaid internship in the concerts industry has something like 200 applicants. So even just getting into a career path there was a challenge in the first place. I spent a lot of time, I'm a drummer and I love music. I was always out playing shows and meeting people at the venues I would play at. I was in a band for a few years that I self-managed. We booked our own tours. So I did all the booking for our band, which meant I learned how to interface with agents and negotiate contract terms, albeit ours were much smaller deals than the ones I ended up working on in my job. But anyway, those skills led me to meet the right people and end up in the right rooms to get a shot to work a desk, an admin job in the concerts industry. So for a long time, I worked in the booking office for the largest concerts company in the world. and I directly supported the president. And so I was screening and answering all the calls from all the big shot agents, processing all the contracts for the arena and stadium tours, and really getting to know the nuts and bolts of the industry. So for about 7 years, I worked my way from the front desk into a junior buyer position. So where I was actually booking some of my own shows. So instead of my boss signing the contracts under his name, I started to be able to book my own shows. And of course, it wasn't that I was taking the financial risk on myself, but I was being graded on the profitability of the deals that I was able to make. And so to answer your question, during COVID, I had advanced to a talent buyer position. So I was responsible for booking shows at the club level, which is about a 2,000 capacity room. So think like your House of Blues or your Fillmore style venues, if anyone's familiar with those, and then supporting all the arena and stadium shows. So it was one of those things where I was working in the office Monday through Friday, normal office hours, and then I would be at shows 3 or 4 nights a week, meeting and mingling with the artist teams and doing what we called a show settlement. So I would go there and sit down with all the ticket audits and the expenses and the contract, and sit down with the artist rep and say, okay, based on everything we made and everything we spent and the deal we cut with you, here's what we owe you. And I would even be the one to write those checks on behalf of the company. So a ton of different skill sets. It was really probably a 60, 70 hour a week minimum type job and career path. But that's just a taste of some of the stuff I was doing throughout my career in concerts.
So what would you say was the hardest part of that job? Nuts and bolts, not so much the lifestyle of the hours or family, just like the actual job. Was it the contract side, the numbers, or the relationships, or would you pinpoint?
Yeah, so I have had to sign $1 million plus checks in which I was the one who did the math to arrive at the number, right? So that you had to be very detail oriented, really understand the P&L behind a concert. So think of a 20,000 person arena with tickets priced at all different levels, ticketing fees and service charges. You really had to be able to dive into a spreadsheet and not only calculate numbers accurately, but reconcile it against the contract, and then have kind of a live negotiation with the artist side, who's, of course, they're going to advocate for their artists as much as possible that, hey, this expense shouldn't be included. That should be on you guys. So there's the financial piece, and then the managing the personalities to do a almost live negotiation, sometimes in the middle of the night when nobody else is reachable. So that's not one specific skill, but that's just an example of a challenging moment that is a learned skill and not something that comes naturally until you get some repetition.
Okay. Okay. So taking all that subset of work, how did you arrive into the field you're in now? How did you get to that lateral opportunity or even aware of that opportunity in the first place?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I did a lot of soul searching during COVID. Keep in mind, obviously, COVID was a massively disrupting emotional event for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, not just their jobs. And so watching this career that I had put so much time and energy into building evaporate overnight, I had two choices. One was to sit around. They basically said, hey, we'll hire you back once shows come back, but we don't know when that's going to be. Or I could pivot and look at other things. I lived in Las Vegas at the time. The national unemployment during COVID peaked at 14.7%. Las Vegas was over 25%. So there was a shortage of opportunities of things you could do outside of entertainment, hospitality, or gaming, all of which were shut down. And so just the job pool there was so limited that it forced me to look outside of that city and outside of my industry. So I had to do a lot of soul searching about what are these transferable skills? Like like I just said, I know how to negotiate with these egotistical artist managers at midnight on a Saturday about concert ticket prices, but how does that help me in any other industry? So I did a lot of exercises like where I wrote down everything I did, like the way you're asking me questions now. So what did you do? What was challenging? What are the things that you had to learn that you could learn easily, and what are the things that you had to develop through experience? And I started doing that kind of mapping to understand, okay, there's a lot of political intelligence that goes into how I had to navigate my time in the industry. There was a lot of supporting executives that had very high intensity, very high expectations, and building enough trust with them that they kept giving me opportunities to be in these rooms where big decisions are made. And so I tried to separate, okay, what are the actual just tactical skills? And then what are my skills as an advisor or a trusted party? And I think that's where the idea of consulting came in because I had learned to solve problems in real time under high pressure and intensity in the concerts world. Some of that live being at the event, the stuff I described helped, but also just being in the office during the day, I learned to operate quickly. I learned to take some heat, so how to operate under high pressure and be responsive and be able to turn around make quick decisions with high impact. And I know some of that it sounds a little vague, right? But the entire consulting industry is a little bit vague. But I at least challenge myself that, hey, I believe in my ability to solve problems. And if what I need to do in the consulting industry is find the right fit for my skills, I believe I can do that. And so I took a role as a coordinator level position, which was essentially lateral slash potentially even a step back from what I was doing. But I showed up and I was doing processing contracts and working on kind of internal operations for the consulting company before I ever even put myself in a position to be billing at clients. I'll pause there because that kind of starts the lineage of my current career path.
Okay. So that job, the soul searching that you mentioned, and the collection of the skills that you've done, was it a relationship? Was it a conversation with somebody? Was it an online inquiry? Like, how did you connect the dots to get to that world?
In the consulting industry specifically, so I looked again, keep picture that it's June 2020. So a lot of people out of work, a lot of uncertainty across every realm in the world. And so I had to look in my network. I'm from the Seattle area originally, and I went to school there. So my college connections were there. Had some family there, professional network. And I just put it out there that, hey, I explained what happened. The company told me that they can only hire me back once concerts come back. I have no idea when that's going to be. And we can't afford to gamble and wait it out until that happens. So I need to make a change. Here's some of the stuff I'm good at. I had at that point built a resume and I had started to quantify some of the impact I'd had. I did a lot of that. I'm very lucky that my parents have had a lot of success in the corporate tech world. And so I had some conversations with them and worked through like, how can I take these skills that to me don't feel transferable and articulate them in a way where the impact would speak to somebody in a different industry? And so a lot of that translation happened and I started to gain confidence that, okay, I helped drive profitability up by X percentage at this company through the shows that I booked over 2 years. I started to find those connection points where it's okay, I took something and made it better as a result of specific work I was doing. And to answer your actual question, I was talking to different people in my network and I got some referrals into a few different companies. I got some interviews both directly at tech companies and then for consulting firms. And ultimately, the company that I work at now was the one that felt the most compatible based on what they were offering me, the flexibility, the work from home, and just the opportunity and upside.
Okay. So work from home was part of it, but then you just said you're in Houston now as well. So maybe
Yeah.
that's part of the journey later. But okay. So you're in Vegas, you have this shutdown. We all dealt with a shutdown. You get an opportunity for a new job working remotely. It's a lateral position. So what was that first year like of getting into a whole different industry and you learn the ropes and accelerating that process of just growth?
Yeah. So some of the best advice I ever got was from my boss at the very end when I told him I was leaving the concert company. I wasn't going to wait around for the jobs to come back. I got an offer. I'm switching industries and I'm moving to Seattle. He and I had a great relationship. And so he gave me a piece of advice that's always stuck with me. He said, the first thing I do at any company under any context is find out who's in charge and find out who gets stuff done. And 9 times out of 10, it's not the same person. And make sure you build a good relationship with both. But understand that dynamic from day one And no matter how much other context you're missing, if you can identify and respect and acknowledge those roles, it will help you figure out the landscape, right? So I loved that advice. And that was really the first thing I tried to chart out because I joined a company where I didn't know a single person. I had a warm referral to a recruiter who then hired me. But I went from this very comfortable, albeit challenging career chapter in the entertainment industry where relationships are everything. And I knew everyone really well and they knew me to a place where I didn't know anybody. I didn't know their strengths or weaknesses or anything like that. Because in a way, I would say some elements of that job I was very overqualified for, but I also recognized and tried to, maintain a lot of humility about the fact that it was a new landscape, it was a new industry. So there were certain parts of my job that came very easy to me. And then I spent a lot of time and energy just trying to understand the political dynamics of the company I was at. So that whole who is in charge, who's making the decisions, and then who are the executors. And I realized that I quickly realized that I had a lane to become one of the people that gets stuff done, and just the follow through, being responsive, acting with urgency, detail orientation, no matter what context you're in, even if you are still learning some of the vocabulary and specific context of an industry, those skills map anywhere. I don't know anybody who hires anyone that wouldn't want somebody who is responsive, attentive to detail, thorough, cares about relationships, et cetera. And so I tried to just lean into the strengths of what I had built in the entertainment industry, bring that over, and then become a sponge for learning about the company and the industry that I was entering.
Was there a point in that early on journey or a story, an example where you said, okay, I got this?
I try to be careful about ever feeling that way, right? But I would say, like I mentioned earlier, there were some components of the job that came very natural. So like one of the key administrative functions of the role was processing contracts and calculating bill rates and contract amounts. And I wasn't actually involved in the negotiations like I had been in the concerts industry, but I understood some of that back and forth dynamic and how those conversations go. And so I was able to be very detail oriented and produce those contracts on quick turnaround, and then also even offer some perspective and insight to the business development team that I was supporting, where it got their attention of, okay, this guy can do more than just process contracts. Like he can contribute at a different level. And that's one of the things that allowed me to advance pretty quickly. Like I said, I'm on my fifth job, each of which has been a promotion and an elevation in only 4 years at the company. And so I think I try never to put myself above any opportunity that I've had, whether it's an unpaid internship or any job. So I try and show up with that hungry attitude, like I'm always learning, but also have, confidence and demonstrate competence and try and let that guide me wherever it'll take me.
Okay. I'm going to take a little bit of a lane here and get into a little bit of the weeds on a few of these steps, but then also respect being general with some of the content and description. So this initial job, you're processing contracts, any other responsibilities, major responsibilities involved?
Yeah, so I had to map out the onboarding. So I was working internally at the consulting company. I wasn't billing out at clients. This company works with 20 plus large enterprise level accounts and then a bunch of smaller accounts too. And so part of my job was to try and help define and map out the onboarding experience, the contracting rules of engagement, build relationships with the procurement teams, try and find ways to accelerate that process. So we drilled down. It's a very data driven company. So we know that if we get a verbal agreement from somebody to hire one of our consultants and they're ready to start, but the contracting takes a month, that's a month that we're not making revenue. And that's a month that person is either not getting paid or potentially costing the company money. So there's a real cost to that. This is part of what I paid attention to, is how to reduce the time to value of getting people onboarded, and yeah, just strengthen those ties and relationships, and then support the business development team too, right? So those are B2B sales roles. And so there was a lot of scraping intel, looking at org charts, trying to see like, where do we currently have a presence? Where should we be targeting? stuff like that, and not necessarily driving that strategy myself, but supporting it. And so I just got an incredible look behind the curtain of the whole industry from where I sat, and I supported a lot of different areas because it's a smaller company, so it's not one of those things where you have one super narrow role. You could lean in to different areas as needed to support.
Okay. So then at what point in time did you get the call up to single A from rookie ball?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was told when I joined this company, which I appreciate, and actually was one of the distinguishing factors that made me want to work there, was they, for better or for worse, there's no linear career path built for the internal position. So you show up, you do good work, you do the core elements of the job, but it is encouraged to proactively express what you're interested in and try and lean in and find opportunities to contribute in that area. So for me, internal operations, process improvement, financial analysis, everything in that lane resonated with me because those were the skills that I brought over from entertainment. Improving, finding ways to make the company more efficient, especially when you're not in a revenue generating position, when you're not in sales. If you want to protect your job, this is a separate topic, but if you want to stay insulated and make sure you're still valuable, if you're not making money for the company, then finding a way to save money for the company is the next kind of safest bet. And so anyway, I leaned in and I started networking within the internal operations team, which there were only 4 people at the time. And I carved out a lane for myself and I made it very clear. I advocated for myself and I found ways to add value to their team before ever even having a conversation about switching. And it just organically evolved that they wanted to bring me on that team. And that came with a promotion. And 2 additional promotions came while I was supporting that team, just because once again, I was very careful never to, you don't want to show up and you get hired for one role and then try and pretend like you have a role that's 2 levels above that. That's not what they hired you for. That's not the arrangement that your employer has with you. So you have to do the job you were hired for before you can advance. So I'm always very careful about that. But anytime I'm in a role, I do try and think, what would the person one step ahead of me be doing? And how can I get some exposure to at least either observe that and learn from it or potentially start contributing at that level in addition to what I'm doing now? So I followed that mindset up 2 more ranks within that internal operations role. And then from there, those skills and that advancement, the trust I built within the organization, the relationships that led me towards what is now my role billing externally with actual out clients at these enterprise accounts.
Because you mentioned looking ahead, right? 2 steps ahead, so to speak, adding value in some way, but it's also, I'm sure, a delicate balance too, because you don't want to overstep your bounds and, someone else's authority, so to speak, or making the assumptions. So I guess, can you give an example of something that you were able to do to help, but then also not offend anybody, so to speak?
Yeah, no, let me think of a specific example, but I'll say this. In the entertainment industry, one of the things I learned how to do very well was support somebody who had a very giant ego, not just one person, a lot of people who had very big egos and loves to take credit for things. And I knew that to grow in my career, being able to tee things up or provide an insight that would allow them to look good would also continue to help them be motivated to mentor me and foster. So I think I learned, I don't know if that's a soft skill or not, but I learned how to hang back and be a support enabler, if you will, without this extreme desire to take credit for things. Now, you could argue that I probably sat a little too far back on some of that stuff. But anyway, when I got to the consulting industry, I think I was already okay with the idea of contributing an idea and not just immediately trying to take credit or stamp my name on it. So a couple examples are contributing to project proposals. I would always be the person to raise my hand to make the deck. I would always be the person to go try and find a piece of information about the company we're presenting to or the people we're presenting to and pull that in, something that requires some marginal effort, not just like looking at what's right in front of you. And I would try and bring those in as a teammate, not as an individual. And I'm not trying to make myself sound like, oh, I'm always 100% selfless and I don't speak up or advocate for myself, because I do think there's a time and a place for that. And that's something I've tried to improve over time. But I believe that the more you pour into the relationships and your employers and your external pursuits, your relationships, whatever it is, the more generous you can be with the energy and the skills you have, that will come back to you. And I try and think, you know, the things I didn't like about the entertainment industry were that people were pretty ruthless and had no problem undercutting each other. If it really boiled down to it, people were only out for themselves. And so I took a little bit of what I learned about what I didn't like from that, and I brought it into consulting and just said, hey, I'm going to operate from a position of confidence, but I'm not going to try and take credit for everything. And I'm okay with teeing up a win for someone else if it means that it's going to strengthen not only my relationship with them, but strengthen the company. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but that's how I thought of it.
No, thank you. Thank you. It definitely helps paint the picture. So you get the promotion on more of the ops side of things. You're getting internally promoted within that sector. So what's the one thing that you think stood out with your group or department that got you to the next level? What was the things that they were seeing?
Yeah, one of the things that happened in the last few years have been a roller coaster, right? So I started my career at this consulting company at the beginning of COVID. And then in 2022, when interest rates started going up, tech companies started having these layoffs. There was a lot of tumultuous stuff going on, which had a great impact on the company I worked for and the consulting industry at large, right? When people get laid off, companies either cut their spend or potentially even hire more consultants. There's so many moving parts at all these companies, which were core to this business. And there were some big org changes and some business transformations even that the company went through that required a lot of retooling of the operations and even the strategy of the company. And so I was very lucky that by that time that all that was happening, I had a seat at the table where I wasn't making the decisions, but I was able to contribute a lot of data and intel about what's going on at the company to the senior leaders to inform their decisions. And so operating at that level where they trusted I could go proactively gather some insights, or they could trust me with a project where I would survey the entire company and, you know, bring them enough data to make a decision about something as big as a reorg. And so just being in those rooms and reporting directly up to the C level, I earned their trust, right? Because I think there's not that many people. Senior leaders usually aren't on keeping people around that they don't feel like they can depend on. And so I think I had a couple opportunities to prove myself. I was able to earn their trust. And as a result, they had no problem vouching for me when it came time to put me in front of a client. You always want to, when you're running a company, you always want to think, would this person reflect on our company the way we want them to? If I put them in front of a client and started charging that client a lot of money. And I think thankfully I had a closer opportunity than most people to prove myself to them so that they could be confident in me. And with that came the opportunity to advance my salary quite a bit. I was able to directly negotiate and just share my income goals with the president of our company and get him bought in on where I was trying to go and what I was trying to do. And I'm eternally grateful that I had that opportunity. I sometimes wonder how I went from a coordinator role to working directly for the president in such a short period of time. And yeah, I'm grateful for that, but I also recognize that there were some tactical steps and some ways that I operated that afforded me that opportunity. And so I try and have that balance of the humility, but also celebrating the success of being able to navigate that.
You mentioned reorganization as just an example of a decision. What are some of the working with these businesses and leaders, some of the decisions or obstacles or things that are being processed to decide on? What other types of examples could there be?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best ones I can share without going too deep into the business models. But when you are a company that is essentially downstream from, like, your revenue comes from other companies' revenue, when a big tech company is making enough money to afford to invest in research and development and shoring up their teams and making them stronger, that directly impacts the consulting industry in a positive way. The inverse of that is what happened in 2022, where all the tech companies, their started going down, interest rates started going up, and they were laying people off. And it was the opposite. It was, how can we cut as much expense as possible while still producing the same quality of product? And so I think every consulting company had to figure out how to continue to stay competitive with the prices that they were trying to charge, which then affected how much you can pay consultants, which then affected the quality of talent you could hire. And so there are all these downstream impacts, starting from things that are completely out of your control and working their way your focus of what you can control. And so I think it was just trying to locate the levers you can pull, trying to understand there's some really difficult decisions, right? Layoffs and any downsizing or things like that. Nobody takes that stuff lightly. And so I think there was a lot of very concerted effort to avoid anything like that at all costs. And it was problem solving, right? It was like, how can we, if we're not making as much revenue or if we're not able to drive as many bill rates, where can we either cut costs internally or how can we rethink the way that we staff people? Can we put multiple people, one person on multiple projects to make sure they get the margin we need from them? Just like ideas after idea of how to make the business model work when you have all those extra headwinds. That's about as detailed as I can get without divulging anything that I shouldn't.
What about the trying to grow a company against all kinds of headwinds and potentially acquiring another company that may be in distress or offloading something that could be just make sense? Are those some of the decisions that you've seen or been a part of the decision making process?
Yeah, no, I have not been part of any acquisition discussions. So the company I work for started as very much a startup and now is a mid-sized company. And the mid-size being right around that 400 to 1,000 range. And so it's not like a big, huge corporate entity. When you're used to operating like a startup, you run things a certain way that doesn't necessarily work when you get to a mid-size and you have several hundred people across several different markets. I definitely was part of and contributed to the idea of what do we really need during COVID. First of all, when you're a company that your entire business is based on delivering for clients, you ask yourself questions like, do I even need an office? How can we continue to be in close proximity to the clients that we serve without spending unnecessary money? So we start to question, like, what is the return on the investment in physical offices and events and things like that? And by applying that level of scrutiny, okay, we're not just going to spend money just for the sake of spending money. We're going to really question the return on everything we're investing in, whether that's physical assets, events, and entertainment, or talent. Right. That was one of the things that definitely had some exposure to, of watching them analyze these decisions of, with a limited amount of capital to invest in growing this company, where do we deploy it?
Okay. Going backwards just for a second. So in terms of the climbing the ladder, you mentioned contracts is one part of it, managing relationships upstream and downstream, and coming with your background, reviewing contracts and dealing with people's ego. You came in with a certain set of skills and natural talents that allowed you to be able to navigate these waters. If you were going to outline some tools or resources or ideas for someone that, hey, I don't know where to find resources or where to find ways to get better at this thing, maybe contracts, relations, like what types of tools or resources could someone lean into to be able to get better at one of these aspects being in the consulting world?
That's a great question. So as you mentioned at the top of the show, I'm a real estate investor as well. I even run a separate online business, as it's an online academy teaching real estate investors. Real estate is another thing where those skills mapped over perfectly. There's contracts, you're sending offers, you're negotiating, you're doing a lot of these things that would apply in any industry. And so I think I'm going to answer your question, but I also want to say this first, that I think the people discount the skills that they already have and tend to chase new skills. And I think it's always good to build new skills. But that whole chapter of soul searching where I said, hey, I'm working in this industry that's very specific and niche, it's concerts, like how the heck could that apply to anything else, that was a very self-defeating, limiting belief that I think probably people subconsciously think more than they realize. So, first thing I would say before you go trying to chase new skills is try and really capture the skills that you already have and find a way to articulate them because you probably have a lot more value in your existing skill base than you think. As far as actually building new skills, we all have contracts and negotiations in our day-to-day life. We probably just don't think of it that way, right? We all have bills, we all have leases, we all maybe potentially own homes, or there's no modern life that doesn't have exposure to those kind of agreements. So just trying to even think of, along the lines of what type of agreements contractually do I have? Do I understand them? I know it sounds like ridiculous, but even just reading through your the agreements you have for your various utilities and your service contracts at your house and starting to question them, right? Like it's scary when you start reading the fine print of some of the stuff you've signed. But I'll tell you, spending those 10 years in the concerts industries and reading the fine print of contracts, you start to realize that on both sides of the contract, each party is just trying to hedge their bets as much as possible and give themselves as many outs as possible. So, not to fixate too much on the contract stuff, but again, it's a lot of stuff that's already right in front of our eyes and without having to go necessarily get a new job or go to school. With that said, I've definitely invested a lot in personal development and skills development. And I think from the consulting perspective, I had to contextualize a lot of this knowledge and these skills in the new industry I was working in. So my knowledge of ticket prices and per cap merch sales at arenas did me very little good when I was trying to go bill at a large tech company. So just trying to understand new industries. I got a like executive certificate in digital transformation. I studied cloud infrastructure, stuff that I had never had any exposure to. And even though I wasn't becoming a software engineer, it just helped to build some level of literacy and vocabulary around those industries so that I could apply those parallel skills in the new context that my career required.
Is there one piece of your industry and contracts that stands out of is it that comes up the most in terms of negotiations or discussion? Is it cost? Is it time frame? Is it something else?
Attention to detail is what it boils down to, right? You knowing how to be quick on your feet with math, but not make mistakes, right? And if you do make mistakes, own up to it. So I got very comfortable building out a P&L. So anything where you have a baseline accounting knowledge is really helpful. So just understanding, okay, what is revenue? Revenue could be multiple streams. What are those streams and where do they come from? And how do I calculate them? What expenses do I need to account for? And how do I understand what those are? What goes into them? And how can I quickly calculate my bottom line? Because obviously, at the end of the day, boilerplate language and legal language aside, that's what a negotiation is typically driving towards is the bottom line. So just understanding in your business how how you arrive at the bottom line and then being able to wrap that into the context of whatever contract you're working on. I will say that was not required of me in this original coordinator role that I moved into, but that's how I thought of it. I thought I want to understand this business. I want to understand what drives revenue. I want to understand how these negotiations work and how you position things. There's little nuances in contracting. Sometimes you want to be the first one. If you're having a verbal conversation about, hey, this bill rate or I have this budget, you can present things creatively sometimes that say, okay, I understand your budget, but what if we spread out the billing this way? And just trying to learn how people think on the other side of the table and then being able to translate that quickly into a contract. So it's not one specific hard skill. It's not, okay, go read this book, but it's just like putting yourself in the heads of the people you're supporting and then the people that are on the other side of the table from them.
Would you say that perspective that you mentioned of going, it wasn't required in the job. So going above and beyond to think forward and backward and in the context of the job that your people around you saw it. And that was what separated you from the rest and helped propel your acceleration up the ladder.
I think that was certainly part of it. And then also making it known what I was interested in and where it's, people say the term advocating for yourself all the time. And I think that in and of itself is an extremely difficult soft skill that you have to develop, right? Because there's a fine line between advocating for yourself and just being arrogant. And I saw plenty of arrogance in my previous chapter of my career. And admittedly, like when you're around people that behave like that, you start to behave like it too. And so I definitely coming into this, it was a huge adaptation of how I had to operate because when previously I was working with people who would undercut each other to get ahead if they had to. But I knew pretty quickly when I got into a different industry, that's not how it works. And yeah, like I would say thinking on trying to understand at a higher level how the things that I'm working on, how they really work and drive the business was definitely something that made me stand out, but also just vocalizing outwardly, okay, I'm interested in this stuff. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, but I think some people would be surprised how just being interested is a distinguishing factor. If you express interest not only in what somebody else is saying, but just how things work, that's a differentiator. And you can ride that pretty darn far. You do have to learn how to do stuff. You can't end up in a senior position and not have any idea how to actually execute. But just being curious and trying to understand how things work, I attribute that to most of my success.
Yeah. Like in a certain field, someone asks certain questions that show, yeah, they care or they're interested, or like certain people ask questions that like shouldn't be asking that question. That's not normal for your job or your role. And not to go in a different direction, but like when I'm talking to an aspiring home buyer and they only know what they know, the thing, and we start going down a rabbit hole of like real estate investing and rents and expenses and all the whole language of real estate investing, and they haven't even bought their first house yet. And there's one question I always ask clients, and hey, let's say you fast forward the clock, how many years, 2, 4, 5, and life changes, and you have to move, and you have to decide what to do with that property. And your decision is either to sell it or rent it. What are your thoughts about that? Open ended. So people will say, I'll sell it. I don't ever want to be a landlord. And someone may say, absolutely, I want to rent it out. Or I'm not sure. Tell me more. And that question just opens up a canvas of how someone thinks about risk and real estate and what they may or may not know. And when someone answers that question and gets excited about the landlord part, that's what gets me lit up. Okay. I love this stuff because I want to talk about that. I love that stuff. So I can relate to what you're talking about with being interested in things. It's going to change the gravity around you with how people look at you.
For sure. I'll add one thing too. So like some of the stuff we're talking about right now, these are like sales skills, but I was not in a sales role. So it was interesting. And this is something I've reflected on over the years. I don't really like sales when I think about it as a concept. I don't like the idea that you're trying to, navigate a certain way. You're in your head driving towards a certain outcome that the person may or may not get there. So I have a weird relationship with sales in general. It's something I've worked on a lot because obviously, like I said, I've had to advocate for myself. I have a business that I'm building on the side. I have my real estate. So it's a necessary skill. But the reason I bring that up is because that works on internal positions, that works within corporations as well. And it's not sales, it's not like you're trying to manipulate someone, but just being interested, being able to listen, being able to understand, and being able to explore the end to end what drives things. That is in itself a bit of a sales motion. Is like probe, get the information, confirm the information, and then drive towards the outcome. So that's just a realization I had somewhat recently where in my head, I'm like, oh man, I don't like sales. I don't like sales. But then I realized I was doing it subconsciously and just thinking about it a different way. So that, I don't know, just the interesting realization I had.
You know, how some of these, you have an outcome where you're trying to achieve, and sales just inherently becomes part of it. A couple things that I want to be able to tap into. This is all about increasing income, saving more money, and investing. And we haven't had a chance to dig into this part of it yet. You're a real estate investor. As your income has gone up, what have been some of the decisions that you made along the way to use some of the funds? What have you done?
Yes, I'll give a little more context on that question, right? Because as I'm very grateful and lucky that my salary has more than doubled in the last 4 years. We've also had three children in the last 2.5 years. And previously, my wife was working full time. She took some time off. Now she works part time. So our household financial situation has been like a Six Flags roller coaster. We've moved across the country a couple times. So there's a lot of dynamics in play there. But what I will say is we started investing in real estate right when I was still in the entertainment industry. So we bought three rental houses in the 6 months leading up to COVID while we were still living in Las Vegas, and we owned a primary rental. We were able to do that largely because we were, what do you call it, DINK, dual income, no kids at the time. And so we were able to aggressively save. For what's the right way to say it? We passed over a conventional expensive wedding and used the money that we were going to would have had to spend 30, $40,000. We used that to buy our first rental property instead because we felt that would, be in better service to our goals with our future family. That was before we had kids. So we planted a lot of seeds in real estate before we had kids. And that's when we did the majority of our growth. But the idea was I became pretty disillusioned during my entertainment career years because I was working as hard as I explained earlier, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, taking a lot of crap from my coworkers and colleagues. But I wasn't getting paid particularly well, even though I was producing a lot of results. And I just didn't like that idea because I felt like I was pouring so much into something and I wasn't getting reciprocal value. So investing in real estate, which is something I had exposure to from my parents, they were real estate investors too. I started to see the reciprocal value when I invest and we put our hard-earned money into a rental. There was something that we could build and operate, have accountability for better or for worse, and own the upside. That was something I didn't have before. I didn't have a merit-based bonus in my previous career path. And so the idea that if I operate this well and I can get control over expenses and have a nice cash flowing property and benefit from the appreciation, that was the most exciting idea in the world to me. And once I saw the potential of that, then I just wanted to do more and more. So that's why we bought three rental properties in 6 months. COVID was both a blessing and a curse. It was dirt cheap borrowing costs, as you well know,
Mhm.
but also a ton of volatility. I switched careers and we moved and all that. So to make a long story short, right? Like we fell in love with investing because it was something we were building for ourselves in which we owned the upside. And so for us, it was easy for us to be motivated to put our income into real estate and continue to grow that. We scaled up. We have 8 single family rentals across 3 states. We've moved a few times. We now live in Texas. The closest rental we have is 1,000 miles away. But similarly, as I did that reflection earlier when I was switching careers, that gave me a lot of confidence in my skill set to manage a business like that. And a good part of what we focus on now is how to do the academy I started is all built around this idea that you can build and you scale and operate a portfolio from anywhere in the country in 20 minutes a day or less just by setting up good systems that are compatible with your career and your family. Roundabout way of answering, but yeah, we fell in love with it and that's been growing in tandem with my career. It's allowed my wife to take some time off with a little less pressure, and it's been an essential piece of our family's financial strategy.
Putting all that time and energy into a job and the venue industry and also now, because all the things we're talking about, working hard, thinking ahead, all you're expending a ton of energy to do that. Plus kids, 3 kids with twins. That's a lot to absorb mentally. Um, so what would life be like from a mental standpoint and just satisfaction standpoint in the job and putting all that in there without having real estate as a part of it? What if that wasn't part of it?
Hey, it's a great question. I'd probably have more free time, but this is a different topic entirely. But I, because out of necessity, time management is a pretty important part of making this all work. And the way I like to think about it is I protect my non-negotiables first. So my non-negotiables are on an average weekday, I spend 4 hours with my family, which is quite a bit when you're working all day. So I spend that 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and that's on my busiest days. And then of course on the weekends, like I typically don't take calls or work too much on my side business. But if I do, it's for just a few hours here and there. And most of my time is with my family. And so when I work backwards and I say, okay, those 4 hours, they belong to my family. That time on the weekend, it belongs to my family. So if I protect that time and if I really am honest and I protect that time, then when I'm working on other stuff, I don't have to feel guilty about it because I know that I've already protected the thing that's most important to me. So that was kind of a reframe I had to do as I got busier and busier. And that's why I talked about this 20 minutes a day, because that's about all the time that I have for it without something else suffering. And I'm not willing for my family time to suffer. Obviously, I can't continue to grow in my career the way I have if I don't pay attention to that. So it's just working with the constraints you have and making sure that you keep those in line with the values that you have. And for me, family is first, and I try and not have that just be something I say, but something that's reflected in the way I spend my time.
Okay. So I want to dig a little bit deeper on that. I guess part of the reason I asked that question also is having this lane over here with real estate growing, at least for me, gave me this extra set of confidence of knowing that at some point in time, I'm going to be able to take the pedal off the gas sooner than if I'm just on a career path of work to 65 and 401k and retire.
Yeah. No, 100%, especially with kids. I believe in the end game and I believe in the wealth building potential, not just cash flow, but I believe in all the reasons, all the compelling reasons to invest in real estate. I'm 100% bought into those. And we're buy and hold long-term investors. We're not trying to make a bunch of quick cash or do anything too flashy. We believe in the methods that you talk about all the time, like the stair step. We've done that, buying a house, living in it, and moving out and turning it into a rental. We've done that 3 times. And so I love that kind of strategy of let's look at the pieces that we have in our life. And it's like a game of chess at this point with eight. Each one has its own place. You can look at how well the properties are performing based on what you need. You can rearrange some pieces. We've sold a couple houses and we've used that money to buy different houses or invest in a different way. So I'm very much I like the game. I like the ability to build something for ourselves. That's what it boils down to. So to answer your question, your earlier question about what would it look like without that, I don't know. It almost doesn't even feel like an option based on how much we've come to love it and how much it's become part of our identity.
So I definitely want to come back to this at a later time because having that exposure to real estate from family, I'm sure had an impact of you getting into the game and doing what you've done in some capacity. And for so many, they may not have that type of exposure. And I think it definitely affects people's ability to get in the game and also confidence to get in the game. And that's the one thing I talk about a lot is that the next deal or a deal that you get into, it's yes, it's numbers, it's having the money, it's having income and having the experience, but it's confidence to get into the game. And if you can shift some things to have more confidence and control some other controllables to have more confidence to get in the game, then you can play the game more and more often. And so many people that I've seen personally, just analysis by paralysis, they just don't pull the trigger, even though we could have. So next time, I definitely want to dig into some of that and the philosophies and strategies that you are preaching and talking about in the community. But to finish things off, if you were going to just boil some of the skills and awarenesses to be successful in consulting in general, how would you just bullet point it down?
Sure. Yeah, some high level themes that I think have served me well that can apply to anybody, no matter where you're coming from in your career or where you're trying to go. Be curious. Don't be afraid to ask questions and ask good questions, right? That skill set alone can take you a long way. That advice that I got from my boss on the way out of the entertainment industry, figure out in any situation you enter into, figure out who's in charge and who gets stuff done. Be very aware of those dynamics and figure out your place within that environment. Don't try and take credit for everything, but also advocate for yourself. Try and learn the skill of finding that balance and lean in and you want to be able to think like the person that's one or two steps ahead of you while doing your current job. I think some people get in trouble when they try and jump too far ahead, but that doesn't mean you can't start to think like that. And you think the person you are trying to become, and that will likely actualize over time if you're good at what you do. So those are some key themes that I think apply across the board. Last one to be just attention to detail, right? Don't be lazy. That doesn't mean grind 16 hours a day, but don't be sloppy, right? Pay attention a little bit more, put a little more care into things than your average person, and that alone can differentiate you. So those are some buckets that come to mind of things that have served me well that I believe would serve anyone.
Good stuff. Measure twice or three times, then cut once. Mindset.
Yes, and take accountability for your mistakes too. That's something that is not always easy to do, especially if you're in an earlier or even mid stage of your career and you're really ambitious. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to make mistakes, but we all are wrong at times and we all do make mistakes. And I think that's a very quick way to earn respect is to be accountable and not deflect. So that's another one.
Okay. Okay. So last thing, in that role, in your lane, what becomes the next vision or step in the future? Where's
Yeah, so you're specifically in my job.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I believe that consulting is has an incredible amount of upside as a career path. At first, it starts with tactical execution and just proving competency with specific skills. But the true consultant, the when you think of someone that's really adding value, they're a trusted advisor. They are able to flex into and out of situations and quickly contribute, not just show up and execute, but contribute. And so I want to continue to learn in a way that allows me to move into new situations, more and more new situations, and be an immediate contributor. And I think with that, it will be an inevitability that I will continue to grow my income the more I can prove that I'm capable of being that kind of chameleon that can show up and add instant value and build trust.
Love it. Love it. Okay. A lot to unpack there. We got to do this again for sure, but I love what you're doing over on your platforms as well. And thanks again. And we'll talk soon.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Bye.